I'm an alcoholic.
The downsides, failure can be the loss of life.
Right. Either humble yourself or the job will humble you.
Yeah.
Humble you.
So I have a huge notion of humility, and I've lost friends at the agency too. So it's I look back in the career and sometimes I'm embarrassed because I've gone in the media, and so I have a publicist who wants the book to sell, and I have PR people here and all this kind of stuff, and so even on the website, as it says, Marc Polymeropoulos is one of the agency's most decorated officers, and that's great, and it's true. But it's also like I also fucked up constantly and made a lot of mistakes. Some of them terrible ones.
Right.
And so I really am a pretty humble person.
Yeah,
it's at the end of the day.
Tricky thing. The publishing company is like, hey, brag, show how great you are, and you're like,
that's your brand. You got to sell yourself on that. But if you then go and hear a leadership talk of mine, it is completely opposite that, because I basically say, yep, you see all this fancy hardware. I said, Mark, I'll invite you and everyone here. You can come to my house in Northern Virginia. You almost did. I'll take you down the basement and have a bourbon. You'll see all my hero wall with all the shit I have all over the place.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you go to a leadership talk of mine, it's all about being humble and owning mistakes and overcoming adversity and how I dealt with all of that.
Yeah.
I think that's more kind of relevant in life.
Was there any guilt associated with losing agents?
Yeah. And I was.
How did you process the guilt?
That I was where we lost our fellow agency officers too. So it's it's horrible. And so you obviously kind of think about what happened. You try to not make those same mistakes in the future. But it's a profession where that these are kind of the stakes.
Is there internal therapy or anything like that for officers?
No, we're pretty shitty on that. That's one thing. That the kind of the mental health system at the agency has always been awful, as it is for the military too.
Right.
And so I think it's getting better now. But when I'd come back from a war zone, I'd go sit like this. I'd be sitting with one of our shrinks, and they'd be looking at a computer, and they're like, "Mark, how you doing?" And meanwhile, like I'm having nightmares of dead bodies and getting drunk every night. And I'm like, "I'm great." And they said, "You feeling good?" Yep. Any problem with alcohol? Nah, don't drink. I mean, just ludicrous. And they're like, "All right, you're cleared." Now I think they've gotten much better.
Yeah.
Since then, but there really was, but here's the thing: the agency does have really good programs. If you do say I have a problem, they've been enormously helpful to people. But the problem is that there's a stigma involved with mental health in the country as a whole, but really in the intelligence and special operations community, because it's you're not supposed to have these things wrong, and we can't see them anyway, so you're not shot.
And is there a peer issue? Like your peers are like, "Oh, really, dude?"
Yep. So if I said, "Hey, man, I got to take a knee. I can't do this. I got to take a year to get my life in order." It's definitely better now, but in the past there would be that because everyone else is doing shitty stuff.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah.
And meanwhile,
but if you were shot in the arm or you broke your leg, be like, "Hey, he's recovering. He's good.
No problem.
No problem."
Yeah, but this, which is arguably more important than having an arm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not to mention everyone's probably suffering together. Like everyone's suffering.
Yep.
And there's just no conversation about it.
Yeah.
And one of the parts of your book that I thought was really poignant and like emotional was about your friend Darren.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that?
That was horrible. That was not only the worst professional time of my life, one of the worst times of my life, period. So, Darren Labonte was an agency officer, was killed in Afghanistan in an operation that, I can't talk a lot about, but I was involved in.
Mm-hmm.
He was this incredible kind of superhuman figure where he was, he was going to be drafted by the Cleveland Indians coming out of high school in Connecticut. And he told them no, and he joined the Army. He was a cop after that. Then he had a lot of jobs. He was a U.S. Marshal, FBI agent.
He sounds awesome.
But he was a superhuman guy. I mean, he was bored when we were overseas one time and ran an ultra marathon just for fun, untrained. He was an incredible figure. Became a CIA officer and was killed. And just kind of and having to deal with our office, having to tell them about it, and then of course everything with his family, was just kind of gut wrenching. And I've kept in touch with the family over the years, and I think. But it was something that was awful because I was so kind of involved in this. Certainly, bore a lot of responsibility for kind of the operation going wrong. And so it's just something that I've had to kind of come to terms and live with. And the only thing you can do, obviously, aside from apologizing, but it's trying to make sure those things don't happen again. And the thing that he would want is for us to kind of go out and kill as many as Al Qaeda and Taliban members as possible. And that's what we did.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about, I guess, avenging his death?
So I'll tell you, so it's a different story because 'cause I can't talk about that.
Okay.
But what I will tell you about is when I was in Shkin, Afghanistan. It's the paramilitary base where I was.
A rough place, huh?
So before I went out there, I came back home one day. I said I got to go to Afghanistan for a year, and my wife said where, and I told her Shkin, and she Googled it, and immediately the Time magazine article came up, said this is the most dangerous place on the planet. And of course, I thought that's fucking cool because that's what I do. My wife is just like, oh Christ.
Yeah.
But off I go, and what was interesting about that place is a couple years earlier, 2 CIA officers had been killed, and we knew who did it. It was the Taliban had done a senior Taliban member. And so when I got out there, I kind of gathered the base, and it was a small base, and this is on the near ends of the earth, seemingly, 6,000 miles from home. But I told everyone, I said, look, we have a year together. I think we had 10 or 20 Americans and about 1,000 Afghan indigenous fighters with us. I said, I don't care what we fucking do, except we're going to get this guy who killed 2 of our colleagues.
Wow.
And we did. And one, it was an incredible moment that night, after, we called in an airstrike. This is, not with any permission, but one of my officers knew, one of the officers' widows back in Fort Bragg. And we grabbed a satellite phone and we called her and we said, we avenged the death of your husband. And as these are never dramatic moments because family members have weird feelings about this. And she just said, thank you. But I remember then sitting around the fire pit. We used to call the fire pit in Afghanistan Caveman TV.
Yeah, I love that.
Sitting around there. And one great thing about CIA is we always would smuggle booze in somewhere. So we had some bourbon. I mean, we're 6,000 miles away from home in a Muslim country.
Yeah.
But we had a kind of a toast, and the job was done. That we kind of avenged the death, and vengeance is not part of what we do.
Right.
This Taliban member was still plotting attacks against Americans. So legally, we were, of course, justified.
Right.
All this was a very kind of formalized operation.
Right.
But,
it's all surgical.
Yep. But ultimately, that was a pretty cool moment, and so that that was the right thing to do.
Yeah. The Caveman TV is so funny to me.
Yeah.
That's
so I mean, look, it's just like, so, you can be my shrink today, Mark, but, so I'm driving this, Toyota Tacoma truck now. And of course, all we did was drive Toyota Hiluxes or shoot them in Afghanistan.
Right.
And then we sat around the fire pit all the time. Well, what do I have in my house back in Northern Virginia? A fire pit.
Yeah.
Which I go out there by myself and sit around there all the time. So you can dissect that.
You can't leave those things behind.
No.
Like it's in.
I love the smell of a fire. I love being outside, and I don't. We have a fireplace, but I like going outside because it reminds me of those periods in times of camaraderie, which were just extraordinary.
Of course, yeah. I mean that type of bond.
Yep.
I'm sure with your whole outfit and everything is probably so tight. And there's something about fire. I've always thought this, that like you could just watch it for hours. I don't know why that is.
True.
Something so human.
We did.
Yeah.
And so. The same, my team from Afghanistan, we still gather each year at a kind of a local dive bar in Vienna. It's called the Vienna Inn. It's probably my favorite place, on the planet. It's a dingy old place. It burned down once. It has these famous chili cheese dogs, and I mean everything is gross about it.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of quintessential agency CIA hangout.
Yeah.
About 12 miles from Langley, from CIA headquarters. But that's where we kind of gather all the time, and I spend a hell of a lot of time there. There's one of the fun. I was with my son there, and I love dive bars for whatever reason. I just just the character of it.
There's a spot in Brooklyn I'll tell you about after.
Okay.
I think you'll like it.
And incidentally, at the we call it the inn. The owner hung up a hat I wore in Afghanistan for a year. It's a Vienna Inn baseball hat. It's in a glass case there.
That's sick.
But I remember sitting there one time, and this famous story, having breakfast with my son, because it's a great breakfast. The food's good there too. It's weird.
Yeah.
There's no booze. It's just beer. It's beer and chili cheese dogs and chicken wings and breakfast stuff. But a rat jumped from the ceiling onto the bar and scurried off, and everyone's eating breakfast and no one moved.
You love it though.
Whatever.
That's great.
Yep.